Hello, I'm Hans Clugston. I'm an attorney in Arizona. I'm also licensed in Alaska. I help people get answers to legal questions, and I also help or try to help them resolve tough problems. Usually, tough problems don't have solely purely legal solutions, but sometimes you have to think through the legal issues to get to a solution. And the tough problem I want to talk to you today a little bit about is what happens if you have a family member who's maybe getting up in age and you're just not sure if he or she is receiving good care, if he or she is taking care of themselves, making good decisions on his or her behalf, whether they're falling prey to scammers, telephone scams, email scams that are going around right now, unfortunately, with as much vigor as we weren't having a pandemic. In Arizona, there are a couple ways that you can look after someone else. If your loved one has set up powers of attorney or a trust, that can help you out, and you won't necessarily have to go into court. Powers of attorney come in a couple of flavors. One is for healthcare to help with doctor's visits and things like that. And the other is a financial power of attorney, which helps you manage bank accounts, might be able to help you work on some social security issues if something like that arises. And then there's a trust, which doesn't help so much with life decisions like healthcare decisions, but can help you manage funds. Now, those healthcare powers of attorney should allow you at least to get access to information about how your family member is doing in terms of his or her health, access to information about whether or not money is flowing out of their bank accounts or other assets, and those sorts of things. So it may be time for you to call up your loved one and see what the estate plan is, not to scare anyone, not to be fatalistic, but it's just good to know what planning documents are out there. And since so much of the country is on a stay at home suggestion, if not order, this may be a really good time to talk to your family members about your own estate plan, your own powers of attorney, if you have a trust, but also theirs and who's in charge and who do you want to be in charge. So I guess it's more than just your loved ones who may be getting older, but also this should take maybe an opportunity to review your own estate plan now. But what I really wanted to talk about is what happens if you don't have those powers of attorneys or your loved one doesn't have those powers of attorney or trust and you have to go into court. Well, nobody wants to do that, but here in Arizona, we call in generally those protective proceedings because you're asking the court to give you powers to be able to protect your loved ones. And they come in, again, a couple of different flavors. There's a conservatorship, which is designed to allow you to manage someone else's money and assets, property, essentially. And then the other one is the guardianship, which allows you to manage someone's health care, where they should live, make life decisions on their behalf. Often, a person would file both for a guardianship and a conservatorship at the same time. But sometimes you only need one or the other. If you only need access to the funds because the person is making good decisions for their own health, or sometimes the money's in a trust and all you need is a guardianship to help them out, your loved ones out with the doctor's visits and that sort of thing. In Arizona, it can depend on which county you're in and how the process goes. Here in Yavapai County, which is a rural county, but far from the most rural county in the state of Arizona, what happens is you petition the court for a guardian and or a conservatorship, and then your duty is to put into that petition why it is that your family member needs to be protected, why it is that their health care decisions should be made by you instead of by them, and why you should be managing their money instead of them managing their money. In addition to setting that forth in the petition, there also needs to be appointed for your loved one an attorney. And that attorney here in Yavapai County, generally you have to have or find an attorney willing to serve in that capacity. And the statutes in Arizona contemplate that let's say it's your mother that you're trying to help out, that your mother or your mother's estate would pay for that lawyer to represent her throughout these protective proceedings. If your mother doesn't have those funds, you may be required to pay for those for that attorney, because that attorney is in most all cases statutorily required. Even if your mother says she's not contesting, it doesn't matter. She needs to be appointed in almost all circumstances an attorney, and that attorney is not provided free. Now, in Yavapai County, there are some limited funds to provide for an attorney sort of on a case by case basis, but the attorneys who are asked to serve in that capacity only have so much time that they can devote to that. So it can be difficult, or at least I should say, in the past, it has been difficult at times to find a lawyer to serve as court appointed counsel. And it's that lawyer's job to represent more or less the expressed interests of, again, say it's your mother. So if your mother opposes the guardianship and or conservatorship, she's entitled to a trial. And that attorney has to follow those instructions and has to try that case, in which case the attorney's fees can be substantial. There's no way around that. In addition, though, to appointing court-appointed counsel for your loved one, the court will also appoint a court investigator. The reason for that is that normally our judicial system operates on the premise that one side will argue with the other side, and in that argument, in that adversarial system, then the truth will come out. Well, in this case, say it's your mother who might be experiencing memory loss or dehydration or victim of a scammer. There may not be a true adversity between you and your mom. And because there isn't that true adversity of arguing back and forth, the statutes contemplate that an independent investigator will report back to the judge whether or not the guardianship and or conservatorship is needed. Sometimes they weigh in on other issues, but basically they're an independent, disinterested party to investigate the circumstances and report to the court on whether or not a guardianship conservatorship is needed. Again, in the statutes contemplate that the protected person, your mom, would be paying for that court investigator. And generally, not a lot is needed after the court investigator, in most cases, issues his or her report. Sometimes there can be trials in which the court investigator is cross-examined and the court investigator is entitled to be paid. Again, here in Yavapai County, there are some limited funds for the payment of a court investigator, but folks who are willing to serve as that court investigator, they only have so much time on their hands to be able to do that kind of work. Be candid, because they need to make a living like everyone else. So that is another cost that you, if you're contemplating petitioning to be appointed as a guardian and or conservator, may have to pay out of pocket. The only way to know is whether there are funds available is to investigate that and probably speak with an attorney in whichever county that you have. Different counties in Arizona handle it differently. The larger counties or the counties with more population, say Maricopa, where Phoenix is based, run a different system. Even though we have one set of probate rules that apply to guardianships, conservatorships across the state, how things get done in each county can be very different. If you want to have more information about this, you might do an internet search for family fiduciaries or non-licensed fiduciaries in Arizona. The Arizona Supreme Court has a website that has some information about guardianships, conservatorships, also about personal representatives, and they have some training modules you can watch online. If you are going to be appointed, you have to go through one of these online training programs and submit the certificate of completion. So if you have further questions about what's really involved in being a guardian or a conservator and the duties and obligations that you will incur, is that you might want to check out the Arizona Supreme Court website about non-professional fiduciary training to give you a little more background on that. Well, I don't know. I mentioned, say that your loved one's in a nursing home. I don't know how it would work if you needed to file a petition for a guardianship for your mother on an emergency basis, for example. There are a couple more hoops you have to jump through to get an appointment done on an emergency basis, because the paperwork has to be in front of the judge sooner. There still has to be a hearing a court-appointed counsel and a court investigator and all those procedural safeguards, but you'll need a doc's report. The problem is, how do you know if someone really needs a guardianship, an emergency guardianship, without being able to visit? Uh, I haven't seen that resolved yet, and hopefully it won't arise here in Yavapai County where a guardianship is needed on an emergency basis for someone in a nursing home that the court-appointed counsel and the court investigator are going to have uh, devil of a time getting in to see, and probably shouldn't get to see if we're going to really have social isolation. I don't know how that's going to be resolved. You just have to put one step in front of the other and see where you put the next foot after you get one step down. I don't think there's another way to do that right now in Arizona. I mention that as a possibility because I know this is going through folks' mind. My mother lives here nearby, and she's social distancing. My daughter and I dropped off a Easter basket for her and talked to her from outside as she stood on one of her decks. That was nice, and she's being safe. My father, who actually did this, it's up there. I don't know if you can see it. That gray painting of that's the lake I grew up in Michigan when I was a kid. My dad painted it. His one of his caregivers was presumptively positive for the COVID-19 virus. He lives outside of a small town of 500 in the Ozark Mountains, and that became quite a difficult circumstance. I have to thank his niece for handling that. She lives about an hour away, and she managed his care. But what it resulted in was much less in-home care and assistance and supervision than he had been receiving. Thankfully, that's been reinstituted, and I can understand the home health care agencies not wanting to expose their caregivers to someone who was potentially exposed to the COVID-19 virus and then send them to other people's houses and infect them. But it made it very frightening. And again, I appreciate his niece very much for figuring that out, because I don't know how I would have done that from here. And even though I'm licensed in a couple of states, as I said, I'm not licensed in Arkansas, and I'm not quite sure how to even have gone about having the legal authority to speak on his behalf to try to find better placements. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to make this little short video, to acknowledge that people may be having to think through these circumstances, to give a little bit of information about how the process works in Arizona. And I guess that's all I have for now. Thank you.